Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing? So we are in week 2 of a 3, maybe 4-week study of the flood, depending. And our goal is to look at the flood story a little bit deeper than maybe we do as kids, that maybe we don't ever get beyond. And so, as I think I said last week, my goal is not to say that what we teach about the flood is wrong. My goal is to get us to look at it some different ways to see how perhaps it's a deeper story that invites us to ask deeper questions than what we tell our kids. And so last week we looked at sort of the baseline. What are the children's stories? And some of you brought in stories for us to look at. I told Mark Rice that he won the prize for bringing in the best story that tells the story of Noah's wife as the "whatever you say, dear." That's a quite interpretive take on the flood story and reading into the reactions of Noah's wife. I found that was classic. So today, what I asked you to do, for over the week is read the story in Genesis and try to formulate as many questions as you can from the text. What are the things that are left unanswered? What are the things that you wonder about as you read the story? And so we're going to look at how asking questions reveals some things about the story, perhaps, that we don't think about. And then we're going to look at some ancient sources. We'll look particularly at some excerpts from the Gilgamesh epic and see what it says about the flood and what we might learn from that. And if we have time, we might explore how perhaps there are 2 flood traditions built into our text in the Bible, and how that might resolve some of the questions that maybe you have. We'll see. And then next week, we're going to look at, this is my area of research, what do films tell us about the flood? And at the end of class, I'm going to ask you to watch a film for next week. It's on Amazon Prime, if you have Amazon Prime, for free. It will tick you off. It will make you mad. But in some ways, I think it's the best Bible movie ever made. And you will watch it and you will look at me and say, "What are you smoking?" But we'll talk about that next week. So, with that, we're going to look at what questions you might have from the text. And I'll tell you a story. When I was studying in Israel, one of my professors was a conservative Jewish rabbi, not a Christian, and he actually taught at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, taught students to be rabbis. So his specialty was how the early rabbinic period, how those rabbis interpret the Old Testament. And the class was looking at how the rabbis interpret the Old Testament versus how the New Testament writers interpret the Old Testament, comparing and contrasting them. And so one of our assignments one day, we were looking at what in Hebrew is called the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, so the sacrifice of Isaac. And the assignment was read the story, and then next week when you come to class, I want you to have written down as many questions as you can generate from the text. And so we all went away dutifully and did that and came back next week. And it's like, what questions do you have? And so we start rattling off questions that we have from the text. And after about 10 minutes, we've exhausted all the questions. And he looked at us, he goes, is that all the questions you have? He says, I have pages of questions on this text. I have so many questions. And what he was doing was exposing us to this idea that what the rabbis do with the text is they ask questions. Because learning comes through asking questions. A recent rabbi who was a blessed memory was the rabbi of London. His mother used to tell him when he came home from school, she would not say, what did you learn today? She would say, did you ask any good questions today? Because asking of questions is how we learn. So, with that in mind, what questions do you have about the flood story? Yes, sir.
Having seen the replica of the ark, in Kentucky, I wonder how in the world did they ever build it?
Oh, okay. It's a massive thing.
It is. It's far bigger than you can imagine.
Okay, it's a massive thing. How did they build it? Did Noah and his 3 sons build it by themselves? Okay.
What's a cubit?
Oh, good question.
I will tell you
Yes.
how big it is.
And what's funny is we don't exactly know because there are 2 different measurements of cubit. One is called the royal cubit, and it's 22 inches long roughly, and the other is the standard cubit, which I think is 18 or 16 inches long. But it's enough of a difference that it makes a big difference in how big something is. And the text doesn't specify, it just says cubit.
Either way.
Yeah, cubit roughly
Yeah.
here to here. Yeah.
Before we even get to that point,
Yes.
I'm talking about why he wants to destroy them anyway. Why are the sons of God but the daughters are of humans?
The sons of God and the daughters of men.
And the daughters are all beautiful.
They're all beautiful. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and so that actually raises several questions. Who are these? What does it say? It says I was just looking at it here a minute ago. Yeah, it's literally the sons of gods, B'nai Elohim, the sons of gods.
Well, it's believed to be fallen angels. I mean, that's a popular one because they would not, angels that had not rebelled would not come to earth and do something that was against God's word.
So
It wasn't a man and a woman. So they came down and disrupted the order that God had set for procreation. So that really kind of got him irritated. And so the flood came in the next chapter.
Okay.
So
where do we
fallen
get
angels, that's just an idea. That's just a
Yeah,
thought.
so where do we get that idea of the sons of God are fallen angels? Where does that come from? First Enoch. Yeah, it comes from First Enoch. May also be in the Book of Jubilees, but it's from extra biblical literature, Jewish literature, written 300 BC, roughly. Some of the translations are really interesting on it. Some of them, it's literally sons of gods.
Plural or
Plural.
singular?
It's plural.
God's plural.
Gods.
Well, so it's Elohim. The word is Elohim, and it is the word that we translate God, but technically it's a plural word. So how do you tell whether it is meant to be God, as we would say with a capital G, or lowercase g, gods? You have to look at the verb. Is it a singular verb or a plural verb? If it's a singular verb, then we would normally say capital G. If it's little g, then it's a plural verb. And I believe it's a plural verb in this case because it's the sons went down. Some translations say the divine beings. Some say sons of God. This passage bothered Jewish interpreters. What do we do with this?
I think we pretty much know they weren't human.
Yes, they do not appear to be human. Yes, it appears to be some sort of divine being coming down and taking the women and creating these, call it superhumans. Maybe is a good word for it. The way that the Jewish writers later come up to the idea of fallen angels or fallen ones is, it says in that verse, in verse 4, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. So, Nephilim. That is, occasionally in the Bible you get words that they don't exactly know what to do with, so they just transliterate it. So it's a literal translation, it's a transliteration of the Hebrew, Nephilim. And it comes from the verb nafal. N-P-L is the root, nafal, which means to fall. So they are literally the fallen ones. And so that's where the Jewish interpreters get this idea of, oh, these must be fallen angels. Okay, good question. Good question. Yes, sir.
I've read a number of writers that have the view, maybe a more traditional view, that the sons of God are those followers of Seth who were in God's favor, or better, the sons of Cain. Of Abel, who were had God's favor, and the sons of man were those of Cain who fell from God's favor.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of people look at how do we make sense of this? How do we take this weird text? And the question is it part of the Noah story or is it part of something else? It seems to be part of the Noah story. It seems to be related to the flood. What other questions? Pam?
Was the flood worldwide or was it localized?
Aha, okay, yeah. When it says it covered all the earth and all the mountains, did it mean Mount Everest too? And physically, how much water would that be?
What happened to all the water after that?
Yeah, there is absolutely, physically, no way that there was enough water that it covered Mount Everest to that sort of a height. It's just, there's not that much water
Actually,
around.
they found water under the earth now, under the oceans that are more water than are in the oceans.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that there's that much water. And the question is, does the biblical writer know about Mount Everest? Right? So, do they even know that there's a mountain there that it would cover, when it covered all the land in their area? If it covered all the mountains in their area, then it covered all the mountains.
Their known area. It's
The known area is a possibility.
However, with God, all things are possible.
Yes. They are.
So how,
That doesn't mean they're probable, but it means they're possible.
Well, if you displaced all the water in the oceans and moved it from the oceans to the land, would it cover the land?
There's one small problem.
What's that?
Physics.
Oh.
What happens to the water? What happens to the places of the ocean, right? I mean, it's, yeah, it becomes
Well, can you split the Red Sea?
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
I have, depends on where you put the Red Sea and what the splitting is, but yes, yes,
You
sir.
mentioned last week, I think, that there are a lot of cultures that have a flood story.
Yeah, it is curious.
Was it the same time frame? Was it the same flood?
It is curious that many cultures have stories of a flood and have stories of some sort of a boat. Yeah, it is curious.
We just know it got all the bad guys.
It just got all the bad guys. Okay. Yeah, let's think about that one for a minute. So, yeah.
So did the water come from rain or from the ground?
Ah.
Both.
Oh, so yeah, we actually kind of see water from two different places at two different points in the story. Okay?
It almost sounds like, a broken levee, how
Yeah.
things broke out.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. What other questions?
Well, if you go back to the beginning of Genesis, the water covered the surface of the earth. God later on caused God to appear. This whole planet started out with water over everything.
Ah, okay, so very interesting. And also, you make an interesting tie-in that I think is also important for this story, and that is the tie back to creation. There's a lot of similarities between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3 and the Noah story. There are lots of parallels there. Okay?
Okay, but I'm just going to say that it does say people on the earth.
Yes.
Like, I think you're trying to say that this is localized, but I think that is definitely conjecture.
Both are conjecture. Okay?
Right, you're right about that.
I was curious about what the population of the earth was.
Ah, how many
How far did it
people?
actually
Yeah,
spread?
and here's the thing. So you're looking at these ages, and you've got Noah having kids at 500 years old. First of all, I can't fathom my wife having to put up with me for that. I mean, think about that. We hit 80 years of marriage, and that's like amazing.
Yep.
Married 500, 600, 700 years. But I was curious, so if you lived to be that long, the population would have to, I don't think that if we lived that long today, the earth wouldn't be able to sustain all the people that would really be on it. So I would think that would grow fairly quickly, especially since they were also having children.
Okay.
Younger ages, getting married at younger ages.
Yeah. Okay.
The practicality of the creatures that go on the ark, like how did he tell the male and female mosquitoes apart? Did they swat at the mosquitoes? And, why did they take them on the ark in the first place?
Yeah. Surely there could have been a little selection. Yeah.
Maybe there was.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, which raises another question of just, we've talked about the water feasibility. What about the animals? Really? 2 of every?
One place it says 2 of every, and then another place it
Oh.
says 7 of only.
Yeah, so is it,
One thing and one place says 2 a different thing.
is it 2 of every, or is it 7 of the clean and 2 of the unclean?
And the 7, is it 1 male and
Each bird.
6 females?
Well, yeah, and now it's, okay, yeah, so now 7 is it, yeah.
No, it
What's
says 7
the,
pairs.
but how do you have, if 7, how do you have pairs? Is it 7 pairs? It doesn't
Yeah, it
7
says
pairs,
7
does
pairs,
it?
I think.
Is it
So
7
you
pairs?
Get 1, and then you have the pairs.
Okay.
7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate. 1 pair of every clean animal. a male.
7, okay, so it is 7 pairs, so it's 14.
Gotta eat.
And then you have to sacrifice them.
Oh.
You gotta
Ah, then, yeah, okay.
carnivores, animals would have to eat.
Okay.
Okay, well, don't you think species have evolved? I'm just saying that, isn't that part of the explanation about the number? Because were there as many kinds of birds Or did birds grow in species because of adaptive need? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That makes sense,
But
like, that makes
less
scientific
species
sense,
evolved
doesn't it?
Back then than there is now.
Okay.
Choose 7 for so it can be complete.
Okay. Why 7? Yeah. What's the, yeah?
The folks that did the life-size ark made a big deal out of the word kind.
Yeah, this is,
7 of each kind.
yeah, so
It's
what,
it's what Amy was saying, I think that was Amy up there.
what,
That, you know, you had a pair of dogs, but you didn't have a pair of dachshunds and a pair of Great Danes and a pair of so on.
right. So, yeah, so this is one of my criticisms of Ken Ham. He tries to take kind as being the scientific term that we understand it from biology of, you know, kingdom, family, phylum, class, genus, species. He tries to link that to tie some biblical scientific 20th century scientific understanding of the animal kingdom and retroject it into the biblical text. And I think it's wrongheaded. But you're right. Dogs, like with dogs, I can see certainly dogs. But I don't know, I'm not even sure that if you really sat down to do the math, does it really allow you, even if you go kind, to say, well, are we going to talk about the different salamanders and the different frogs and the different, when you start adding up all these different things, even by that math, and then he throws dinosaurs into the mix too. Right, and then you start adding all that, and all of a sudden you get this massive multiplicity of animals. And does it fit?
You said it was a big ark.
But it was a big ark. But was it
That big?
that big? So it raises the question, right? How really all these animals, all of them? Okay.
It
They
does
don't
say
live in the same
animals.
environment either. They come from
Ooh.
different areas of the, like some are rainforests and some are oceans.
Yeah, how do you deal with the difference of rainforest and all sorts of variations? Good
What
question.
about fishes and birdsies?
Hmm?
What about fishes and birdsies?
Well, yeah. So the fish, yeah.
Fish are good.
So here's the question. If we even just think about the fish for a minute, and if we assume that there was enough water that covered the entire face of the earth, were they all freshwater fish at that point, or were some of them saltwater and some of them freshwater? And if you put that much water into the system, you're going to change the salinity. And if you put saltwater fish into freshwater, they bloat up and they die.
And the other way around.
Part of the thought is that there was brackish water,
Okay,
which they could both live for a short period of time. So,
yeah.
if you haven't been to the Ark up in Ohio,
I've been to the Creation Museum, but I
went through the
Yeah.
Ark. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah.
It will blow your mind about how they take and they just offer alternatives. For example, they took DNA on a dog, for example.
Yeah.
Well, their rendition of what a dog would look like back then, does not look like a dog.
Yeah.
Okay. So they go through this, and it's all very logical, and it really makes you think. Really does.
What other questions?
What happened to the animal, to the plant life? What
happened to the plants? Okay.
Survived because the bird came back to branch. When Noah let the bird out to see dry land. But then just shortly after, Noah's got a vineyard, so was there a time gap in between there, or was it something immediately?
Okay.
I've wondered, when God speaks to Noah and he says that the earth has become full of, man has become corrupted and the earth is full of violence, and he says, I'm going to destroy them both. why the need to destroy the earth? I mean, he seems to emphasize that aspect too.
Why? Yes. Okay. So why does it have to be destroyed?
I mean, he seems to be saying that the earth has become corrupted, not just mankind.
That's a very good insight. Okay. So when we watch the movie, I want you to think about that. Ask that question as you're seeing the movie and see what the answer the movie gives. It gives a very biblical answer. It gives an extra biblical answer, but it gives a very biblical answer too.
And we're applying a lot of modern day scientific knowledge to this that didn't exist back then. Like we're talking about the earth and they covered the whole earth. The earth wasn't round to them back then. What they thought the earth was much different than what we know the earth to be now.
Yeah.
And
And
even the different species, they didn't have all this scientific knowledge.
And so I have debated this with a number of people that try to look at Genesis 1 and find the Big Bang Theory in Genesis 1. The conception of the world in Genesis 1 is a Babylonian conception. Waters above, land, waters below, earth supported by pillars. That's how they viewed the world. We can't expect them. And the Bible doesn't seem to want to change their mind about that. It's totally okay with them understanding the world that way. So yeah. Okay, what other questions?
Actually explains why it talks about the waters
Coming up. Yeah. Chris?
Why did Noah not curse Ham and instead curse Canaan?
Oh, yeah. What is this curse? Ham does something which seems a little weird, and yet he curses Canaan. Okay. Good question.
Oh no. I got obsessed with that idea and I forgot my question.
Okay. All right. So you see, there's lots of questions, and I could come up with a bunch more probably, and we'll talk probably about some of those as we go along. Yes.
Okay, you know how long it took Noah and I forgot her, Mrs. Noah, to have a baby?
How long was it when he?
Wasn't it 150, 170
It's a long
years?
time. Yep.
And then, I'm just saying, then they're expected to populate the earth, not Noah and his wife, but with
3 kids.
infertility issues. You know what I mean?
Good question. How physically? How does that work?
Yeah.
Gotta have a lot of triplets.
Lots of
Can you imagine the thing ripen? It's been 300 years, honey.
But it's also not only the humans, but you had 2 animals.
Animals, yes.
Unless, what happens if one of them dies?
Lovely
And
that
does
it
that
happened.
whole kind of species?
That's why there's no dinosaurs.
Oh, that's it. That's what happened to dinosaurs.
That's what I went down.
That's what happens with unicorns.
Another thing, it's not a question as much as just a curiosity. Maybe there's a question there, but there's so much detail leading up to the flood, talking about the generations from Adam. How many years before this person was born, and how many years this person lived until the next.
Yeah.
All the way up to, interestingly, Noah's father, Lamech, died 5 years before the flood. But his father, Methuselah, outlived Lamech and died a year before the flood.
Some calculations put him dying in the flood.
Not if you take the years.
I did it one time, and actually it came out to be the flood, I think. But it's
Anyway, my
yeah.
point is, even as you get into the description of the building and how many days and what month this happened and how many days and what part of the month this happened, very detailed story, and yet in other instances there's a lot of questions that remain. Why would they not be as detailed about things like?
So you have
How did you do
some
the
places you have some really interesting detail, and other places you don't.
Right.
Okay, that's a very good question. That's a very good question.
I have an
Okay,
answer to that one.
you do. What's the answer?
Man
the story.
A man wrote the story. So let's take it. So these are all really good questions, and so what I want you to do was we look at the example of Gilgamesh here for what it says. See how it might address some of these questions, and then when you watch the film this next week, see how it might tackle some of these questions or not tackle them. So let's look at Gilgamesh, for example. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a fascinating series of stories. Gilgamesh is, the Epic of Gilgamesh is ancient Mesopotamian literature. So that's the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates, modern day Iraq. And we see examples of the Gilgamesh story in Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian versions. Okay, so that basically means we have about 1,000 years of Gilgamesh stories. And the basic idea of the story of Gilgamesh is that Gilgamesh is on a quest for eternal life. Okay? And he fails to achieve it. I'll tell you how he failed to achieve it in a minute. It's kind of funny. And it might make some light bulbs go off. His consolation prize for not getting eternal life is basically enduring fame. Okay? And so on this quest, he does some things himself, he has some adventures, and he meets some people that have done some amazing things. One of whom is a guy named Utnapishtim, who is Babylonian Noah. So let me tell you a little bit about Gilgamesh and his quest for eternal life. He finally is told the plant that will give you eternal life is at the bottom of this lake. And if you can swim down to the bottom of the lake and get this plant and bring it back and eat it, you will have eternal life. And so Gilgamesh goes out and he swims to the bottom of this lake and he finds the plant. And he swims back to shore and he's really tired. And he says, you know what? I'm going to sit here for a minute and take a nap and I'll eat the plant after my nap. And he takes a nap, and while he's taking his nap, a snake comes up and eats it.
Oh.
And he loses eternal life.
Devil.
Snake.
Is it a snake or a serpent?
Same difference. A snake keeps you from getting eternal life. Where have we heard that before? Now, the other thing that makes Gilgamesh so interesting for scholars, and why I think it's important for us to look at it, is the version that we have in Genesis of the flood story. Our book of Genesis, the final form of it that we have probably dates to 600 BC, give or take. I'm not saying there weren't earlier traditions that were incorporated into it. The form that we have today is probably about 600 BC, which means Gilgamesh predates that by 1,000 to 2,000 years. So it's a really old story, and it makes for a really interesting comparison. And so what we're going to look at are just some excerpts from Tablet 9, which tells the story of the deluge, where Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, who, when Gilgamesh meets him, has been made into a god. And so Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh his story of how he got to be godlike. And so here's some excerpts from that. It says, Shuruppak, a city you know of, and which on the Euphrates is situated, it's on the bank of the Euphrates is situated, the great gods resolved to send the deluge. They swore their father Anu, their counselor the warrior Enlil, the throne bearer Ninurta, the canal officer Ennugi, The leader was Ea, under oath with them. That's with the people. He repeated their plans. This is Ea, the god Ea. And this is a weird little thing, but he repeated their plans to the reed hut. Reed hut, wall, listen, reed hut, be mindful, wall. And what's happening is he's really talking to Utnapishtim through the wall of his house, is the way it's describing it. Man of Shurupak, that's Utnapishtim, son of Ubartutu, destroy this house, build a ship, forsake possession, seek life, build an ark, and save life. Take aboard the ship seed of all living things, the ship which you shall build. Let her dimensions be measured off. Let her width and length be equal. Roof her over like a hidden depth. And then it says, the wealthy carried the pitch. The poor brought what was needful. On the 5th day I laid her framework. 1 full acre was her floor space. 10 dozen cubits each was the height of her walls. 10 dozen cubits each were the edges around her. I decked her in 6. I divided her in 7. That's on the days. Her interior I divided 9 ways. Thrice 3,600 measures of tar did I pour out inside her. On the 7th day the ship was completed. Whatever I had, I loaded upon her. What silver I had, I loaded upon her. What gold I had, I loaded upon her. What living creatures I had, I loaded upon her. I made go aboard all my family and my kin. Beasts of the steppe, wild animals of the steppe, and skilled craftsmen I made go on board. I gazed upon the appearance of the storm. The storm was frightful to behold. I went into the ship and battered my door. The gods became frightened of the deluge. They shrank back and went up to Anu's highest heaven. The wind continued. The deluge and the windstorm leveled the land, crumpling over. I sat down and wept, tears running down my face. And he skips a little further. The boat rested on Mount Nemush. A little bit later, when the 7th day arrived, I released a dove to go free. No landing place came to view. It turned back. I released a swallow to go free. The swallow went and returned. No landing place came to view. It turned back. I sent a raven to go free. The raven went forth, saw the ebbing of the waters. It ate, circled, left droppings, did not turn back. Suddenly, this is a little bit later, so what happens here is, after they get out of the ark, Utnapishtim decides to set up 7 altars for sacrifice. And, of course, the gods all like a good barbecue. And so they all come to the barbecue, to the sacrifice. And Utnapishtim says, everybody can come, but all the gods can come but Enlil. And suddenly, as Enlil arrived, he saw the boat. Enlil is the god that's responsible for the flood. He saw the boat. Enlil became angry. He was filled with fury at the gods. Who came out alive? No man was to survive the destruction. Ea made ready to speak and said to the warrior Enlil, you, O warrior, are the sage of the gods. How could you, unreasoning, have brought on the deluge? Impose punishment on the sinner for the sin. Then Enlil came up into the ship, leading me by the hand. He brought me up too. Hitherto Utnapishtim and his wife shall become like us gods. Utnapishtim shall dwell afar off at the source of the rivers. Thus it was, they took me afar off and made me dwell at the source of the rivers. Now, do you see any similarities? What do you see?
Bird.
Okay, the birds coming and going.
Built an ark.
He built an ark.
The
Yep.
size of the ark was
Big square.
This one's a big square.
Yeah.
Okay, it's big.
There was a flood.
There was a flood. Okay, the ark in the Bible is not square; it's rectangular, but still it's big. Okay, multi-decked.
Used a lot of pitch.
A lot of pitch. Yes, we get a lot more detail here on. I cut out some of the detail. He talks about the tar they threw into the ovens. to then make the pitch. So he gives a detail of how much they put in, how many nails they. It's going all over with how much detail he put into this thing. Okay.
To rest on a mountain.
Comes to rest on a mountain. Okay. They offer sacrifices.
So are you telling us that there are multiple Noah stories out there
There are lots of them.
for thousands of years, and maybe
Yes.
all of this is just pure fiction?
Oh no, I'm not saying it's pure fiction.
Oh.
I'm simply saying maybe it's pointing to a common source, common tradition. But what I find interesting in this story is, what is the reaction of the gods to this?
Impose punishment on the sinner for his sin.
Who is the sinner in this case?
Gilgamesh.
What did it say earlier? The gods ran in terror. They ran in fear. And there's kind of this indication in the story that the gods are horrified by the flood. And Ea, who's the god that lets Utnapishtim in on the story of what's going to happen to build it, tells Enlil he's wrong. Why did you do this? So what I find interesting about this story, that the biblical story ignores completely, is, should we be horrified at the flood? It's horrific.
It still has why. We don't know why.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
The flood.
Yeah. Now,
If the only way of purifying mankind and getting rid of the fallen ones and their prodigy was to get rid of everything except for just the precious few. If that was the reason for doing it, then there was a real reason for doing it. If not, why was God so ticked off at the world, I'm using a nice word here, that he decided that he would wipe his slate nearly clean? He didn't completely clean the whole blackboard. He left a little corner of it to regenerate and to start over. He could have completely done this and started over again.
And why didn't he do that with Adam and Eve?
It's the first time that I know that the righteous were separated from the sinful by water.
okay. What made Noah righteous?
We don't know.
His obedience
Obedience to what?
to God's command.
What commands?
Build a boat.
Well, but he's already righteous before he builds a boat.
Yeah. That's
So what
I
makes
have-
him righteous?
Who knows?
He walked with God.
Enoch walked with God, didn't he? Did it say Noah walked with God?
Yes, it does.
Does it say he walked with God? What does that mean? What did he do that made him righteous that made the others unrighteous? The story doesn't really.
How is it that we walk with God?
We listen.
We listen to whatever God has commanded us to do, and Noah did the same thing. He walked with God.
And the question is, what had God commanded people to do up to this point?
Multiply and fill the earth.
Multiply and fill the earth. Yep, that's kind of about it that we know of. Now, did he say possibly more? But it's sort of open-ended question.
I want the wise knowing one of which
was clean and unclean.
Genesis 8.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. We're probably going to have to come back to that. This idea of clean and unclean.
How did Abel and Cain know how? Which was good and which wasn't?
Right, there was
God has
sacrifice.
given us an instinct to know good.
Now, you're probably seeing, I'm letting you sit in some tension. Okay? That's intentional. Okay? I want you to be sitting in some tension on this story and thinking about it. Okay? Because it's in the tension that we learn. Okay? We don't necessarily learn by coming up with the quick answer. You know, I like the joke, the Sunday school answer, Jesus, right? You know, that's the answer to all the questions, right? So there's a tension here, and there's a question of this event is horrific, and there's tons and tons and tons and tons of death, and the question is, you know, in the Gilgamesh epic, a whole lot of people get saved, right? A whole lot of people, because he's like, well, we're going to have skilled craftsmen, we're going to have all these, you know, he's got a list of, yeah, of course all my family, but then there's these other people we're going to need too. But was everybody evil? Were the kids evil? You know, there's a lot of destruction in this story. And what I find interesting in the Gilgamesh epic is it at least reveals this question of, man, this is a lot. This is a lot. And the gods are kind of horrified by it. I want you to sit in that tension, and then I want you to look next week at, go to, if I can get my screen to move here. On. Make my mouse move just a second. Okay. Read the story again. And then we're going to talk about film adaptation. I'll show you a couple of clips of some things. And I'd like you to watch Noah with Russell Crowe. From Darren Aronofsky. It's on Amazon Prime. I promise you it will make you mad. I promise you it will. When this movie came out, evangelical Christians lost their flippin' minds. I'll admit, I lost my mind too. I thought, what in the world has he done? But now that I've studied a lot of other things, I realize Darren Aronofsky is a good Jew. And he knows Jewish interpretive history very, very well. And he adapts it into a flood story that is quite remarkable and pulls in a lot of other biblical texts. So you're going to have questions, you're going to be angry, bring them, and we're going to talk about it. But maybe it will help you see some new things in the flood story.
Don't give out your phone number, babe.
So you can bring your pitchforks and your pitch and your wood, and you can burn me on the lawn as a heretic next week. But watch the movie. I think you'll find there's some really interesting things in it that we can talk about. That talk about why the flood happened. And the story raises some interesting questions about free will and God's will. So anyway, thank you all very much for the comments, participation. Sit in the tension this week, work through the story, and we will talk more next week.
Anything